Victor knows the fine details of insuring firms like yours. For over 60 years, Victor has provided outstanding service and broad, flexible, and innovative professional liability solutions to engineering firms and ACEC members. As a Victor insured, you have access to free, on-demand continuing education courses, automated contract reviews, and endless risk management tools and resources to help manage projects and grow your business. Visit www.victorinsuranceusa.com/ACEC to learn more. Welcome to Engineering Influence, a podcast from the American Council of Engineering Companies, coming to you from our 2021 Fall Conference in Marco Island, Florida, and brought to you by Victor Insurance Managers, one of the largest and most experienced underwriting managers of professional liability and specialty insurance products in the world. And I am very pleased to be joined by our keynote speaker today, Jenny Clark, who was fantastic this morning to talk about something that we all are really focused in on, and that is not just hiring, retaining and cultivating talent.
Yeah, and culture.
And culture, yeah, which is more important today, I think, than ever before. And I was really impressed when you got off of the area where I think everybody kind of focuses in on about what do I need to know to hire people? Mm-hmm. When you start talking about that more intangible level of the greater consciousness of how do you identify a leader, not just by, like you said, competencies or abilities, but that inherent.
Who are you?
Who are you as a human being?
Yes.
And, you know, for our industry and your experience at Google, mm-hmm, being over 50% engineers in their, you know, in their roster, very analytical.
That's right.
Way of looking at things. Sure. What advice would you give to, not just, like you said, it's not an HR thing.
No.
This is every level of an organization that if you're not leading people, you're leading, like you said, you're leading projects. Mm-hmm. How do you identify that? What do you look for when you're trying to figure out who is this person as an individual and how do they view the actual working with another human being?
Right.
You know?
Yeah. That's a great question. I think, you know, I spent a lot of time talking about competencies,
yeah,
right, as the selection criteria over just pedigree and domain expertise and some of the things that we traditionally like to choose when we're, yeah, hiring. And I think if you're doing that kind of competency-based assessment, a lot of the questions are how questions. And give me an example when.
Yeah.
And so now you're getting a richer response. Mm-hmm. It's not, have you done it?
Yeah.
It's, how did you do it? How did you build a team? Yeah. What were the criteria that you used to select the team? Mm-hmm. And when you start asking those questions, you're going to get some of the range and the extent to which someone, yeah, really has a heart and a soul, mm-hmm, and they have that level of self-awareness that I talked about.
Kind of kicking them off the KPI answer and the, yeah, metric answer to talk about actually how they dealt with challenges.
Yeah.
Because the example you also brought in about the guest you had on your podcast, who's the SEAL,
yeah,
talking about if you're calling yourself a leader, you're not, you know, that's not.
You really, don't get to call yourself that.
Yeah, yeah, somebody has to be able to say that.
Yeah, you can't insist upon followership. It's earned.
Yeah, exactly. So I mean, it's, and I was thinking about that too because, you know, in my level, I oversee certain things, mm-hmm, and my responsibilities are overseeing a few direct reports.
Sure.
Doesn't mean I'm a leader.
That's right.
Right?
That's right.
And
that's an org chart.
That's an org chart. And I guess, you know, from an individual manager's perspective, you know, because that made me stop and think, you know, boy, I gotta actually think about that. Mm-hmm. You know, what advice do you give people, and what have you seen to, like, you know, to help people in positions of responsibility undergo that understanding and step outside of themselves and say, what do I have to do to be considered, not so I can say I'm a leader,
yeah,
to be considered a leader by the people who I'm responsible for managing?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I'm going to make a distinction too between managing and leading, because, yeah, there is a big difference. And I would say the simplest way to articulate it, I think, is that leaders influence, mm-hmm, right? Managers are trying to ensure that a set of tasks have been completed. And so I think for leaders who have been able to earn that title from their followership, one of the most critical elements to me is trust.
Yeah.
And that becomes evident by virtue of one of the things I mentioned, which is feedback. If you're giving feedback to people, they can begin to trust you because you're being honest. I had my team. I had 30 directs.
Yeah.
They were indirect. A team of 30 had 6 direct reports, and they would say to me, "I know you gave me that feedback that I didn't want to hear because you care."
Yeah.
And so when you can, and that's the humanity. And I used to say to my team, I love you guys at the end of a staff meeting. You know, it wasn't mushy. I'm not a mushy kind of gal. Yeah. But they knew that I cared and that I wanted to see them be successful. And they can only be that if I'm sharing what they do great and what they're not doing as well.
Yeah. Or giving them the ability to try something.
Absolutely.
Just say, if you have an idea, give it a shot. If it doesn't work, it's not the end of the world. We'll just learn from it.
Fail fast, as they say. Yes.
Yeah. And then just take it and learn from what you have, what happened.
Yeah.
You know, one of the things that we are really focused in on, and both from our strategic level, from a strategic plan perspective and industry wide, is this push towards, well, you kind of saw it in the room, a greater level of diversity and inclusivity within engineering.
Yes.
And that is it's just not hiring. It's also the issue of, we've designed the built environment. There are responsibilities towards social equity that we have when we're building infrastructure, designing infrastructure. Largely, I guess, with our firms, you know, a lot of them have been around for a long time, and they have their own geographic preferences.
Yeah.
They have their own institutional preferences. How do you think firms should start taking off those blinders? Yeah. Because it's just not a issue of you know, background, gender, the attributes. It's also geography.
Sure, I get that.
You know, and I would imagine Google does the same thing. It's like we want Silicon Valley, we want Stanford, we want, you know, certain. How do we get people to think otherwise?
Well, some of it is, you know, go where there are pools of talent. Google, for example, said we know there are more Black people and Latinx folks in Miami, Chicago, DC, Atlanta. So we're going to actively seek out to increase not just the traditional functions who are there. A lot of those were sales or engineering offices. And they said, instead, why can't we have people from other functions there, from marketing to finance? Why can't we?
Yeah.
And I think that's what companies need to start thinking about, because part of what you're benefiting from is these individuals become ambassadors in those communities. Yeah. And it feeds on itself in a very positive way. So that's an easy win if you can get past this bias. The preference becomes a bias at some point, right?
Yeah, it becomes, I guess, a way of doing things. Yeah. We've always hired from these schools. We've always hired from these areas.
Yeah.
And like you said in your presentation, it's just not country.
That's right.
We have to start
look around the world globally. Yes,
especially now with COVID, it's breaking down the office structure.
You don't need everybody to be here in the United States, so why wouldn't you?
Yeah, so start looking beyond that, and I would imagine now with the resources at people's disposal, especially when it comes to hiring and everything like that, it's a low barrier to actually start looking, even if you're a small or mid-sized firm.
Totally. It's not that hard.
Yeah.
But it requires shifting your way of thinking. And I'd hear people say, well, you know, it will take longer and there's issues of immigration and true.
Yeah.
But is that not more additive? Might that not be giving you a competitive advantage to secure business in some of those other countries and regions?
And make yourself more competitive and have punch higher. And we have one guy who we talk to a lot on the podcast. He's an engineer, but he's become more of a futurist. And he's talking more about the deconstructed engineering firm, the virtual engineering firm, where it doesn't exist in physical space, but instead has people all over the world that are working on a contract basis on projects, and to look at that as a distributed
a model. I think that model is that's what COVID has forced us to examine, right? And I think that's something that we have to be open to, and it's going to require a different kind of leadership and management to make all that work effectively.
A lot less direct micro kind of managing, because now you have to, you know, diversify yourself to look, you know, across your people across the world.
Right. And these people from different cultures.
Yeah.
Who are used to being communicated with in different ways.
That's a really big challenge. Because we're so used to communicating one way, and we're going to have to realize that what we say here is going to be interpreted completely differently.
That's right.
Somewhere else.
Yeah.
That's a really important.
So maybe that means that you don't just send your American white male to wherever, right, to Asia.
Yeah.
But maybe you get locals who have a grasp on some of that cultural, some of the nuances associated with that to manage those teams.
Yeah, because the nuance can
kill you.
Can kill you.
It can.
With your experience in the tech sector and seeing Google, I mean, that's so. A friend of mine actually just departed Google. She was in executive recruitment over in Lisa Matrinko was her name. I think
didn't know her.
Yeah, it was
Okay.
relatively recent. So I think it was after you left Google.
Yeah.
But she mentioned just how it the mindset, the Google mindset,
It's pretty locked in.
is really locked in.
Yeah.
And she noticed like, wow, it's they really do want a specific kind of person.
Yeah.
And I you're mentioning that it's changing a bit, and it's kind of that whole kind of Silicon Valley thing is evolving.
Yeah.
For engineering firms, what industry do you think they should look at if there's an executive in the C-suite who's saying, what's going out, what's trending?
Mm-hmm.
Is there an industry you think that they should really be looking at to kind of follow suit, or is it just?
I'm not aware of any industry, any whole industry that seems to be doing this well. What I would say by this, I'm suggesting, I'm extrapolating. Excuse me. We're talking about diversity.
Yes.
Excuse me. And I think the consumer packaged goods companies have done better. And I would argue that some of the financial services, the personal financial services companies have done it because they're oriented toward their customers.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
And so it's more the B2C orientation. And I think a lot of other companies need to adopt that mindset of the B2C. Who is your client?
Yeah.
They have different expectations as well. And are you attuned to what some of those are such that you can meet them where they are?
That's a really important point, because when you say B2C, for a lot of our firms are working for public sector entities.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, the public sector entities' clients are the population,
That's
of
right.
which 40%, like you mentioned, are not your traditional, are people of color. And we're starting to notice that for those public sector projects, there are hard quotas for not just, the firm,
Right.
but the team that's presenting and pitching the work.
That's right. And who might you contract with locally to give an advantage to, right?
Exactly.
To give business to help them. Yeah.
So it's not just, for a lot of executives out there who might be thinking, I understand, I see this, it's out there, but you know what? It's not affecting us.
Yeah, it is.
It really is. Whether and either you're going to get ahead of the curve, or in the case, if you're working with public sector clients, you don't want to be behind it and be told by a government agency how to structure your firm.
That's right.
Get in front of it.
That's right.
Right?
So you're choosing.
Yeah.
And if I can, I'm going to go back to something really basic that I just read about in the last couple of days as it relates to hiring.
Yeah.
And it was a professor from Harvard who had done some research, and he was identifying the fact that a lot of these applicant tracking systems and a lot of these even job boards are eliminating. He referred to, did you hear about that?
Yeah, and I was
the
like,
invisible workers.
Exactly. The algorithm.
Yep.
I had this with Disney. My another personal example. My wife is an ethics attorney. She worked for the Secretary of Transportation. Now she's a C-level, at a firm. She said, "Oh, I'm just going to apply to Disney because we love Disney." Wasn't even considered.
Right.
And then she contacted somebody she knew and said, "What is going on?" And they're like, "Oh my God, you just got kicked out of our system because the algorithm didn't think that you were appropriate."
Yeah.
And that's scary.
It is
because
scary.
people are relying on technology.
Well, he was even saying specifically things like a gap of more than 6 months. Think about
Really?
what that means. Yes, more than 6 months in your work experience.
Especially now.
It'll kick you out. That's right.
Yeah.
Right? And especially now, that's completely irrelevant.
Yeah.
no college degree. There are jobs where it really doesn't matter if you don't have a college degree, but if you don't, it'll kick you out.
Yeah.
Even though it might say that we prefer one. That's what the job description will say, right?
But that goes back to that idea of competencies and all that. It's like that way of doing it. And like you said, you see people with degrees from really good institutions, and they're very good on paper, but
they can't deliver.
They can't deliver the work.
That's right.
And I always stuck with me because I like, you know, my grandfather was went to night school, got an engineering degree, worked for Honeywell. Somebody who went to like a big name school was above, couldn't do the work.
That's right.
But they weren't seeing that because back then, especially in the 50s, it was, well, he went here, so he has to be able to do this.
Yeah, but see, something I didn't say when I was on stage is educated doesn't mean you're smart, and smart doesn't mean you're competent.
That's true. It's only trial by fire, and like you said, you have to make that business case every step in the way, and you have to get that. Well, like you said, we're a family. This is how we do things. You have to say, does this fit the business?
That's right. Is it serving the business?
At every step of the business's development?
Exactly.
Yeah, there's a lot we can talk about here, and I really appreciate the time, especially after not just doing a keynote, but then doing a panel, and then coming on the podcast. I really appreciate that.
It's a pleasure. You guys are great.
But I really encourage everyone to take a look at Ginny Clark at JinnyClark.com, and reach out to her if you're saying, what do we do? And you need some guidance, because she's some fantastic insights, and I really do appreciate you being part of our first in-person conference in 2 years.
Yeah, kudos to you, and thanks for having me.
Still getting used to it.
Really appreciate you guys.
Thank you so much. And again, this has been an edition of Engineering Influence, a podcast from the American Council of Engineering Companies. We will see you very soon.